many of us have gone to academia and written about these issues. And still, in a certain sense, he is a different type of an individual. And sometimes these individuals it's necessary to know about them because the education system makes people uniform. And whatever individuality and creativity is there, particularly in the next generation, is sort of smothered by the time they finish their SSC. But these people with their lives offer always a different perspective on how to move. And as he says in that brief video, that he encountered the forests and the birds and the wildlife in the city where he lived, and he decided, I'll make a profession out of this. And I mean, today's parents would have told him, this is not going to get you anywhere, not going to make you any job, not going to make you happy. He was besotted with science. I mean, there's no way out of it. Because I'll give you a sort of a comparison. Out of the 412 pages of his autobiography, Walk Up the Hill, after I talked, Anirudh is there from the Center for Ecological Sciences, he could read something from my biography. Out of his 412 pages, only first 60 deal with his personal life, only 60 pages. Including, and those 60 pages include his childhood, education, marriage, and the years he spent at Harvard with Wilson, with Levontin, and Giles Mead. I mean, all that is finished in 60 pages. And then begins the panorama of his life. His wife, Sulochana, died only died in July, 6 months before he did. But she was also a Harvard scholar and also a meteorologist, so it's sort of swamped by his place in Indian society. So despite a career that took him from Pune to Harvard to Bangalore and back to Pune, he always remained outwardly, and those of us who know him and worked with him, he was always simple and unpretentious in appearance and dress, generally khadi, perennially in chappals, eating his food with his own hands, and rarely crippled by the desire to please or to bow to anybody. And during his lifetime, he ate anything and everything, including horse meat, raw crab, and rat. And he slept on bamboo mats on the hard floor when visiting homes of social activists or tribals. He used a cycle, public bus, or simply walked. And this is one of the top scientists of this country. In Goa, he stayed overnight, I know, in the houses of mining activists like Hanuman Parab in Pisulle, which was devastated by mining, and went down to Kaure, where he was interacting with mining activists who were facing something like 30 to 40 mining leases all at one time. So there are thousands of persons associated with science in India, but it will take a while before another Gadgil appears. From his biography, he says, at the age of 10, I read through the Marathi translation of Plato's Republic. At the age of 10. I didn't know there was a Marathi translation of the Republic. And he states this in his memoir almost matter-of-factly as if it was a done thing for persons of his age. But I don't think today children of 10 years from. I know people of 20 years are not reading. The legendary Salim Ali is a close associate of his father then. So he will not only learn from him, but will eventually criticize him. I thought, in fact, that he had parted ways with Salim Ali. And I mentioned this in an article that I wrote. And Gadgil sent an email to me correcting it. He wrote, while I did not share Salim Ali's prejudices relating to farmers, herders, and forest dwellers, and criticized his misjudgment about banning of grazing in Bharatpur, which he discusses in his book, we did not part company. I remained close to him to his end. Indeed, I spent some time with him in the hospital in Mumbai when he was on his deathbed. I also wrote a glowing obituary of him in Current Science. I have interacted with a large number of friends with whom I maintain very cordial relationships, despite having serious differences with them. And I can vouch for this myself. I had occasion to strongly object to the EIA prepared by the Center for Ecological Studies for the laying of the Konkan railway track in the early 1990s, But on his visits to Goa, we would still go out for dinner occasionally in the company of my good friend Harsh Nalwani. I don't see him around here, and he's a miner. And during which Gadgil invariably wanted to eat fish, but he couldn't get it in Pune. But to return to Gadgil's upbringing, at age 14, he remained obsessed with being a field ecologist like Salim Ali. That was his ideal. And in his 10th standard, he was already writing articles for the Marathi popular science magazine Shrustitnyan on animal behavior. I think he wrote about 10 articles in a series. And this is a practice of the scientist which is very rare. He continued for the rest of his life. He was proficient in Sanskrit. He could read the Rig Veda, Ramayana, Mahabharata, and Gita in the original. Already part of a universe, people to the likes of Mahatma Phule, Ambedkar, his own illustrious father, D.R. Gadgil, who was very influential with the central government and also the creator of the Gadgil formula, Iravati Karve, J.B.S. Haldane, and D.D. Kosambi, and profoundly influenced by the thinking of the Buddha. Gadgil declares in his autobiography that by the age of 15, he had clearly formulated religious beliefs. I do not believe in any institutionalized religion and am not a Hindu or a Muslim or a Parsi or a Christian or a Buddhist. So you can see the seeds of an emerging, highly motivated public intellectual are there for everyone to see. The other tug on his heartstrings is his magnificent obsession with doing hands-on scientific research, which really sets him up as what people call people scientist, who was mostly out of his I don't think he really believed in things like laboratories and so on when he got into his scientific work. He spent 6 years pursuing his scientific training in Harvard, assuring himself that he was as good, if not better, than the best in that institution, and he succeeded in doing so. By the time he had completed his association with America's higher education elite, he was already rated as an outstanding biologist, capable of independent and creative scientific work recognized by international peers, and with other scientists already citing his research, even before he left the United States. Now, throughout all his intellectual skilling and all the high positions he would occupy, he remained firmly grounded. But the ground in this case was not just the birds and the bees in the natural environment. It was farmers, Adivasis, and other rural folk, which the scientific community really takes very seriously as people who have knowledge and who have knowledge in abundance. So on his return from the US, Gadgil returned to Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. First he came to Pune and then he went to Bangalore. And in 1983, because Satish Diwan was the director who gave him a lot of latitude, he set up the Center for Ecological Sciences. He also set up the Center for Theoretical Studies, 2 centers, but he was mostly with CES. And his objective was to try and inject at least some of the spirit of the working community or the liberating atmosphere that he had received when he was working with Harvard. I asked him once, I said that in your book, you don't tell us how you replicated the environment of Harvard. He said, I did. He said, I did it, but it was not very apparent. But it was certainly not apparent in the other departments of the Indian Institute of Science, but at least in the Center for Environmental Science, we had a very congenial atmosphere, and people were really literally supporting each other in the ways we thought. But he would be with Center for the Ecological Sciences for 30 years. That's a very long time for somebody to be associated with the institution, because sometimes people do stagnate. His work as an ecologist in the broader sense would encompass a bewildering range of issues that would intimidate any wildlife biologist, even one trained in Harvard. One of his major published papers was on sacred groves. So before Gadgil wrote about sacred groves, a few people had even heard about them. And the educated public, I think, is aware of sacred groves today only because of Gadgil's pioneering work on sacred groves. It was mostly in the Konkan and in the Western Ghats. And prior to this work, the Forest Department really did not recognize sacred groves at all, because the forest department is a colonial institution, so they don't recognize things like cultural beliefs in forest conservation and so on. But today, all the sacred groves are recorded, and the one in Goa, for example, all are recorded, and the one who has done major work on this is, of course, our own Rajendra Kedkar, and there is still no law except the Forest Conservation Act that will protect them. But even there they go up, because most of these forest stretches of the sacred groves are less than 5 hectares. The Goa government does not recognize the forest stretches less than 5 hectares. And they fought the Goa Foundation with the together with the real estate lobby on their side in the Supreme Court, and got the Supreme Court to agree to their point of view. We lost 500 square kilometers of forest. Now, Gadgil's preoccupation and grand sympathy with tribals, farmers, and peasants led him to investigate the huge problems of pollution and scarcity created by paper mills. This was one of his unprecedented pieces of work because it involved taking on the birlas, the Harihar polyfibers, and the West Coast paper mills. These two paper mills were set up because of the enormous resources available in the Dandeli forest for production of bamboo. So they went and ripped up all the bamboo groves and converted them into paper. And they devastated all the bamboo. And Gadgil documented in his papers how, I remember reading it at that time in the EPW, how the tribals who were working with bamboo, making baskets, had to pay the equivalent of 1,000 rupees at that time for a ton of bamboo, when the factories got it for 15 rupees a ton. Because of the bias of the industrial government system, that industry must be supported and all other forms, can be wasted. So this study alone took 5 years. I remember my first acquaintance with him was on the Dandeli forest, and the regeneration of bamboo, the bamboo cycles, and so on. But by this time, his work was already becoming known in India. So when Mrs. Gandhi wanted to set up the Department of Environment in the central government, she asked Gadgil to do the proposal. And being Gadgil, he went all around the country, all 4 corners, trying to talk to people about their environmental concerns and how they should be represented in a department. And made the proposal to Mrs. Gandhi, and eventually the department was formed. It's called the Department of Environment and Forest, and now it's called Climate Change. And in 2011, it's the same department founded on the principles evolved by Gadgil, which refused to release Mother Gadgil's report on the Western Ghats. This is the circle the department has gone through from its foundation till today. They refused to release it. We had to move. We filed an RTI. We got an order which they refused to respect. Then we went to the Delhi High Court, and in Delhi High Court ordered the ministry to release the report. Otherwise, when we filed a proceeding before the NGT, we didn't even have a copy of the report. But we filed it, and then we got that order of the NGT which forced the ministry to issue that 2013 notification, which is still in force, which bans mining and it bans all these real estate industries of more than 10,000 square meters, 20,000 square meters on any portion of the Western Ghats, which have been identified as ESAs. It was Gadgil who formulated the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve proposal, and that is still in existence, one of the largest biosphere reserves in this country. And even till today, judgments are being passed against people who have put up resorts. I think a month ago, about 20 resorts have been told to close down shop because they are already come up in the corridor of the elephants in that resort. It's important to mention this because by the time he died, he had also had views which were differing from his earlier part of his work. So the other important thing was the Biological Diversity Act. That came up requiring every village to prepare a people's biodiversity register. And he tried to get the government system to do this. I mean, it's the most elaborate piece of legislation in the country, which actually says that every village and every local body must know what is the biodiversity that exists in their area, what type of plants, what type of microbes, what type of fish in their rivers when they are fishing, what type of seashells they are harvesting, what are the, everything must be recorded. And I remember going with Vandana Shiva 20 years ago to a place in Kerala where we did the first biodiversity register and got it adopted by the Gram Sabha, and it became a legal document, because unless you have Gram Sabha adoption, it doesn't become a legal document. They got it done. But today what they have done is they have managed to get consultants to go and do the biodiversity registers of all the village panchayats in Goa. And I asked my panchayat, where is the biodiversity register? They've got it done. But I said, how did you get it done without the village even knowing? The village doesn't know that it's been prepared. They said, no, it's available. They said, give me a copy, we'll give it to you. But this is the attitude. So today they have done all the PBRs. But without the, this would have horrified, Gadgil, and he would have probably known about the situation. But I don't think that having got out of active science, he was, able to proceed. But even though he had retired from the CS, he was still obsessed with these community registers and with community rights over forests. And he went, I think, that Menda Lekar group in Maharashtra, where he actually worked with them to restore by resolution the control of the village over everything that happens in that particular village in terms of the resource utilization. But despite that having been done now at least 15 years, no other panchayat is yet even willing to even reach 10% of what has been done in that village. Not in Goa, I think. In Goa, we have only 2 or 3 biodiversity registers which are available, which you can say are reasonably good, whether people really know. But as such, the whole village as such still doesn't understand, because they don't explain things at Gram Sabhas. Gram Sabhas are meant to just approve accounts and approve projects and so on. Then he undertook detailed investigations of the Chipko Andolan, Uttarakhand, the Silent Valley project in Kerala, the Beti project in Karnataka, and the list is almost endless. I mean, whenever there were serious issues, one of the few scientists really who said, I'm willing to go out and look at it, meet people, and write something about it. I don't know really, most of the other scientists have lost whatever they've learned in them. They have become Sarkari scientists. Scientists means you are now about it, you can't talk unless the vice chancellor approves what you want to say and so on. So it's not worth, say, asking our sons and daughters to join these institutions really, because it's a lifetime of slavery. Nothing interesting is going to come out except a lot of paperwork which will benefit printers, So as a scientist, as an ecologist of his stature after he had achieved, he prepared a history of the Gaudi Dangars. Which scientist would prepare the history of the Gaudi Dangars? I mean, the most ignored community, even today, Dangars in Western Ghats, I mean, they're really on their own. Nobody looks after them. I mean, maybe that's a strong point that they will talk to themselves. But sometimes we educate people are unable to. And he invited them to come to the Indian Institute of Science as people who have botanical knowledge. When he was asked by the Goa government to do the EIAs, the study of the EIAs, environment impact assessments of the Goa mining industry, after it had been shut down and there was inquiries going all right, left and center, they made the mistake of asking him to do a study of EIAs. About, as far as I know, about 139 environment clearances were given. So you can imagine the number of EIAs that were done to obtain all those within the space of 2 years. And he shattered all of them. The result is the Goa government refused to release the report. The same ministry refusing to release his report. It must be saying something that the Goa government didn't want to release EIAs of mining sites of environment clearance which are already dead and gone. But even then they didn't want to to release that report. Of course, we've got a copy. I asked Rahul, I said, where is our copy? I don't have it on the Goa Foundation website. He immediately sent it to me. It's available, not through RTI. I think maybe Gadgil himself may have given it to us in the end. He spent 7 years walking up and down in all the wildlife sanctuaries. Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Goa. 7 years walking. Something about a man who can spend that much time walking. That's why I think his autobiography is called Walk Up the Hill, because he was mostly walking. And then he worked with NGOs everywhere. He had no problem working with NGOs. I mean, the whole work of the Western Ghats Experts Ecology Panel was done through meeting with NGOs, getting the NGOs to organize the meetings, and because that is the way at least people would be brought into the circle of consideration. So in the end, because of this involvement with these tribal villages and their inherent capacities, he became convinced that key to empowering people was giving them the rights over natural resources, and we are in broad sympathy with that. We are fed up of these forest departments. We are fed up of all these regimes. They have become a danger to all these ecological assets. Mrs. Gandhi passed the Forest Conservation Act in 1980 to restrain the state governments from felling forests. Today, and they transfer the power to the central government. And today, the central government is a major massacre of forests in the country. They're taking the right away from the state government. Now they do the deals. And it's large-scale deforestation. Now it's for, of course, for operators like Adani with their coal mines in all these places. Systematic no-go areas are being opened up and clearances given. I don't know who gives them the authority to grant a clearance to cut down these type of forests. Now that brings me finally to, before I conclude, to Gadgil's Goa connection, because he lived in Pune, but he was actively involved in major issues in Goa. One was, as I said, the first was the Konkan Railway. The Konkan Railway, we had a tip with him because we expected, like normal environmentalists, that now Gadgil is doing this work, he's going to do the EIA in such a way that they are going to have to scale this project at that time. And so we were very, very disappointed when the EIA report, actually we didn't even know that the EIA report had come. We only came to know it when there were public hearings, and then we got copies of it and so on. And then we were a bit disappointed with the EIA report because it was it was done by the Center for Ecological Sciences, and it cost about 10 lakh at that time. And it was very conventional. It did make, for example, in Karamboli Lake, he himself realized what had happened. They wanted to take the track through the Karamboli Lake, and that's one of the major wetland bird sites of Goa. And they recommended and asked that it be taken to one side, but I don't think the railways were willing to accept it. Then finally, the central government set up a special committee headed by Kamla Chaudhary, in which J.B. Jayavendra Sartejo, I think your father, was a member of the committee, and then they also put in their word that it should go to one side if the railway track were to go ahead, and that's how the railway track at Karbali is at the edge. But when Gadgil went to see it a couple of years ago, I think in 2022 or 2000, he still said that even this alignment has created a lot of problems for the functioning of the lake as an ecological system. So there, of course, we were on different, but it didn't affect. He didn't. When we next met me, said, "Why did you take umbrage at our, EIA report after we did it and whatever it is?" But I thought that it didn't match the stature of Gadgil, and anyway, he didn't do what he normally did with other EIAs. Talk to people. People were agitated. There were people coming out on the streets. There was the central government had to stop work of the Konkan Railway for 4 years in Goa. And that bankrupted the Konkan Railway for 20 years. They first began to make a profit 23 years after the starting of the railway in 1994. First, in 2022, they got some profit of 20 to 30 crores. This is the penalty they paid for ignoring what Gadgil would have done normally, which is go and consult with people and take the damn railway into the hinterland where it was supposed to go. And in Goa, they violated that principle and brought it back into the coastal area and laid an embankment across all the drainage of the entire state of Goa, which is unbelievably unsound. And nobody could have approved that because the water is flowing from east to west into the sea, and the embankment is going from north to south, and it is cutting a huge wall. In some places, it devastated fields. They said more than 2,000 hectares were destroyed by the embankments of the Konkan River, all over. Very severe, and that EIA should have mended it, but it never did. Of course, the second major contribution was the Western Ghats Ecology Experts Panel. Again, this brought Gadgil out in his best. I mean, he was there, everywhere. He would be walking in all the cities, going to Kerala, going to Karnataka, Bangalore. He came to Goa. In Goa, we organized a whole list of about 12 to 13 people who actually made elaborate, presentations before the panel. The panel was sitting there, and then all these people would come one by one, and it was in the NIO. A big screen, and they all made their presentations to him, and he took everything seriously. It's not like nowadays you go for a public hearing and they say, we have said, now put it inside. They put everything inside. They don't intend to read anything. But he took everything seriously, and his work was of such outstanding character that he was the first committee of that kind which actually put out their methodology in current science, asking for legitimation, asking for critique, asking for comments. I don't know which scientist does this. So it was constantly up in public domain for correction, for inputs. Never once did he said you're talking nonsense. He was only all ears. And he never dominated any discussion because his purpose was to listen to what was happening, because he realized the real problems on the ground, and they can only come if you listen. And not if you're constantly, like nowadays experts go and they want to keep on talking all the time. They don't really believe in hearing what people have to say, and then end up in difficulties further on. So both the Western Ghats report was so upsetting to the central government that they immediately tried to put it under wraps. And as I said, we had to fight with them to get it released. Then we had to go to the NGT to get it implemented. Then it went to the Supreme Court. And then finally, we got interim orders which are still valid and still in force, and which have completely blocked the mining industry in those areas. We had to file a fresh petition in 2022 in the Supreme Court saying that, look, what's happening at Wayanad and all these places. It's important that the Supreme Court look at the Gadgil report again, because that is the best scientific report on the Western Ghats. It is done by 12 people who live in the Western Ghats. Not by Kasturi Rangan, who never faced the Western Ghats, and who got 5 or 6 experts like Sunita Narayan who have never lived in the Western Ghats. How can that report be of any greater quality than of people who have been living here? And we have made that a prayer in the petition that please ask, because the people of the Western Ghats are entitled to the best scientific protection that is available, not a third-class protection that was given by the high-level working group. They call it a high-level working group. It's a low-level working group. Because it just lowered down all the definitions of what a Western Ghats is and what can be done and all that sort of thing. So we are entitled, we are second-class citizens or third-class citizens. You give us the best report that the scientists have produced in this country. So that's a prayer. It's still there before the Supreme Court. It's not come up. They have given notice to the ministry, but it has not come up yet. But even though Kasturi Rangan came after that, he still was bound in large sense by what Gadgil had done. So the result is that today most people don't know, and we don't talk about it too much. I think about 108 villages in Goa have come under the ESA label, which means no mining can take place there at all. And out of that, in that area, 154 mining leases are sealed for all time to come. Look at the impact of one man doing his job properly. Now, how much it saves the labor of all the people who come after him, and the environmentalists and our society and the village communities who don't have any hand in this. But sometimes somebody comes like this and then they get relief in ways they have never understood. But it's sort of a God-given thing given to them, so they're happy about it. be protected from this industry. About the EIAs, I've already spoken to you about, that Gadgil did the EIAs and did mincemeat out of them. And it hasn't enabled better practice to ensure, because now when the latest EIAs were done, the state government started granting fresh leases pursuant to Supreme Court orders in 2022. Again in 2023 they went through the EIA process. And you will not believe it, but I'm telling you right now, and you'll try and figure out how we have landed up in a country of this kind, with this type of intellectual experts in the Ministry of Environment, which Gadgil himself originally proposed. That the EIAs of Vedanta were based on the assumption that what Vedanta was going to operate is a greenfield project. Greenfield project, a label given to a mine which has been operating for 50 years. Passed off by the experts of the ministry as a greenfield project only to prevent Vedanta having to explain what was done in the last 50 years to restore the environment, the damage that had been created by mining activities in the last 50 years, and what rehabilitation was done, how many trees were planted as a result of a previous environment clearance given to them, and whether that environment clearance had been violated or adhered to. Nothing was considered, because the central government said, we have taken a decision that if a letter of intent is granted for a fresh auction, then we will treat it as a greenfield project. Now, you can think about what's happening in the country if this is the way environmental studies and environmental assessment is taking place. I mean, they gave 139 environment clearances. Till today, they're not asking a single question about when any of those 139 environment clearances was implemented by any of those mining parties. And the new people who are coming to take these mining leases are saying, but why are you blaming us for what the previous fellow did? We didn't do anything. We have just been given a new lease. So they are saying our benchmark is what we see today. So 50 years later, they are going to say, the next guy is going to come and say that, why are you asking us? I mean, that mine is over. We don't have to repair anything. So the permanent recipe for keeping things in a state of disaster as far as mining is concerned. So this brings me to the most interesting part of this little talk, which is his major assault on the management of wildlife under the provisions of the Wildlife Act. So a couple of years ago, Gadgil made another astonishing declaration asking for the Wildlife Act to be scrapped. I don't know if many of you know about this, but it's in writing. And this created really consternation among all wildlife experts and environmentalists, and said that this man has gone out of his mind. And then he also boldly ventured to announce that the consumption of wild animal meat is a legitimate practice across the world. Gadgil was never a hypocrite, so he would say whatever. I mean, Maneka Gandhi may be there to jump on his throat, but I'm saying this, I'm a scientist, I'm just telling you. That's like some of these Hindu guys say that we are all vegetarians for all time, and then Jha comes and says that the eating of beef is mentioned in the Rig Veda and all that sort of thing. This same sort of thing. So wild meat is being eaten everywhere, and animal populations can only be kept in check by predators, and human beings are the largest predators on the planet. He insisted that the Wildlife Act had no ecological basis, which is correct. That the Act was drafted, that was very interesting. Act was drafted by former members of the elite ruling classes who had themselves inflicted severe damage to wildlife already through purposeless hunting. What he means by purposeless, he gives an example. Lord Linlithgow, British Viceroy for India, for example, shot 4,273 birds in a single day, recorded, simply for pleasure. So if a tribal goes and catches a bird to eat, we make a big noise, like encroaches and so on. But he said, this is the tradition which India has inherited in terms of the Wildlife Act. And Salim Ali had proudly proclaimed he had enjoyed a tiger steak with Gillian Ripley after a shoot. Speaking the truth. Salim Ali played a, this is what I'm quoting from him. Salim Ali played a prominent role. I'm doing this only so that this doesn't become a very mournful thing to have some excitement, some gossip. Salim Ali played a prominent role in shaping the policies for wildlife protection in independent India. This began with the constitution of the Indian Board of Wildlife in 1952. It was chaired by the Mysore Maharaja with Dharam Kumar Singh from the royal family of Bhavnagar as vice chair. These are all known safari hunters. The members included Salim Ali and 2 tea and coffee planters. Now, what are coffee and tea planters doing on the National Board of Wildlife? In 1972, the act was drafted by M.K. Ranjit Singh from the royal family of Konkan, another hunting family. Today, if you sit in front of Ranjit Singh, you get a blast if you say anything against wildlife. The entire effort was thus written firstly by Maharajas who tended to have little sympathy for their subjects and were used to paying homage to their British rulers, and secondly by British tea and coffee estate owners who treated Indian labor on their estate as slaves. Gadgil's views were naturally colored by his personal experience of large-scale corruption in the Forest Department, misuse of legislation, which we all know, like the Forest Conservation Act and the Wildlife Act by its officials, to extort bribes from poor villagers and tribals. He also says the act criminalized the entire population of India that sometimes had recourse to wildlife meat for nutrition, unlike the upper classes who shot for entertainment and trophies. In other countries, wildlife protection acts focus on management of national parks and reserves and ban hunting, but the rest of the country's wildlife is kept outside their purview. In India, wildlife found anywhere is a property of the government of India. So anyone found in possession becomes a target for criminal possession, and even if any wildlife enters a home, you cannot kill it. I mean, laying out the circumstances. This is the countrywide total ban on hunting of a whole range of wild animals is completely irrational and betrays a total lack of understanding of ecology. Clearly, the way forward is for us to scrap this unconstitutional act and promote conservation of the entire range of biodiversity, including flagship wildlife species, by empowering local communities to manage these resources in the same fashion as the Scandinavian countries do so effectively. Gadgil was convinced that 50 years of the rule of the Wildlife Protection Act has precipitated a monstrous human-wildlife conflict. I'm sorry to have to read this because I'm a wildlife man anyway, but I can't help it. I said we can disagree and we can still talk. In line with that, he expressed opposition to the idea of a tiger reserve in Goa when Talula, our tiger campaigner from Panjim, the architect, green architect, wrote to him in the context of the visit of the Central Empowered Committee to Goa, and she asked him to look at a representation she had prepared. He was very curt, and as a matter of fact, he sent her an email, sent a copy to me as well, and said, "I am very unhappy with this attitude that to protect the environment, we need tigers, and that humans cannot do so. So you can't do it, don't put this responsibility on tigers." Well, this is ridiculous. We must therefore invoke Vagraj or Hulideva or Vagdeva or some other deity. Tigers have been killing right and left sisters or mothers of my Gond Adivasi friends, but that must be accepted by completely falsely blaming the Adivasis as encroachers on the forest when the revenue records show that they have been living there for more than a century. This I got on October 16, 2025. Fortunately, the Western Ghats tiger expert Ulas Karan had a different view, and he wrote us a very elaborate defense of the tiger reserve, which we presented to the CEC, and which the CEC has incorporated in his report and ruled that Goa requires tiger reserve, and the Supreme Court should pass an order and set it up in the space of 3 months. So we need to reiterate here that at present the entire wildlife of India gets restricted to protected areas that amount to just 4% of the country's landmass. 4%, 1,022 wildlife sanctuaries, national parks and tiger reserves together, just 4%, and we are not willing to give them even that. The National Board of Wildlife, since 2014, has sanctioned habitat damaging projects in more than 500 of these national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. The Goa Foundation has challenged all of them in the Supreme Court by writ petitions. The Supreme Court doesn't have time to hear them. Unfortunately, they spend 3 whole weeks on stray dogs. They don't have time to hear. Serious damage to all the wildlife sanctuaries. Despite Supreme Court orders saying that you cannot take a leaf or a twig out of a wildlife sanctuary. They are enabling huge mines and roads and highways to go through wildlife sanctuaries. In Goa, for example, we have over 750 square kilometers out of 3,700 square kilometers of wildlife sanctuaries. And according to the Goa government, some 1,274 households are within the sanctuary areas. The Goa Foundation has objected to any order, the Goa Foundation has objected to any orders issued by statutory orders, authorities, to exclude these areas of settlement from the sanctuary areas. We said it cannot be done. But the foundation has supported the implementation of the Forest Rights Act, which considers and grants sanads to people living in sanctuaries to continue use of the forest for their personal domestic needs. Now, we know that there will be aberrations. It is our duty to correct them. Our officers are doing all the time constant research to see how we can remedy some of the aberrations that are taking place. But we know in any case that you may do whatever you want. Ultimately, sanctuary limits are sacred, and it's not going to be able to modify them. So as can be seen, this man, from whatever I have described, whatever you have seen, whatever the video you have heard, he was an extraordinary human being primarily. Forget about being a scientist. Scientists only never deprived him of being a human being. He was not a powerful politician, and he did not retire with a great deal of wealth, because wealth did not make much sense to him at all. But with almost the entire country of 1.4 billion individuals today, including those who claim to be intellectuals, pretending that somehow someone has cut off their tongues, we shall be happy that we knew this man because he spoke without fear, and because he did good for science, for the Western Ghats, for Goa, for the Goan tribals whom he kept as his friends, and for the wildlife as well. Thank you. Can I ask Anil to please come? He wanted to read something from his autobiography, which I think you would love to hear.
Okay, so first of all,